All right. Hey guys, I'm Matthew. I'm an iOS developer on app dev, and I'm going to be guest lecturing today about Firebase. Okay.
Okay, so some logistics. So your hack challenge midpoint meeting should be scheduled between Wednesday and Friday, and then your midpoint submission is due on CMS on Friday at midnight. I'll be putting that assignment up soon, and then if your mentors have not reached out to schedule a meeting by Wednesday, please let me know, either in or in a private post on Piazza. Yeah, so you should keep working on your hack challenge, and just so you know, the midpoint is due then. Eatery has an exciting new update. Eatery now has College Town eateries on it, so if you're looking for somewhere to eat in College Town, now you can check Eatery for all of your hours and what they serve. Yeah, go check it out. It's great. And then another thing is Ithaca Transit is doing Android beta testing, so if you have an Android device and you want to try and use Ithaca Transit, our Android team has been hard at work developing this. So there's a form, and then I'll post it on Piazza later today so that you can access it.
Okay, so what is Google Firebase? So you might have heard this term. It's a pretty big buzzword these days. And what it is it's an abstraction. So the thing is, people, now you know how to make an iOS app, right? But you might not know anything about backend. So Firebase actually allows you, it provides an abstraction. You don't have to write any backend code, really. And you can pretty much have a backend, if that makes sense. So what Firebase does is it provides services like authentication, a database, etc. And you can pretty much, you don't have to worry about running a server or managing a server. Google does that for you. So that's what Firebase is. So yeah, the real-time database is a really cool service, and it lets you, they provide a NoSQL database, and it's cloud hosted. So what that means is anytime everyone who's connected to the app, if they make a change in the database, everyone gets that change. So it's pretty cool. All right. Okay. So like I said, it's synchronized. So everyone who's connected to your app, we're going to talk about messaging app today. So if you send a message, then everyone will get that message. If you have a group chat and if it's just between two people, then the other person will get that message immediately. So with Firebase, you also have authentication. So you can do Facebook login, you can do Google sign in, anything you really want, or you could also do a custom login feature. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna do a live demo. So I made a Piazza post with the starter code if you guys want to check that out. And pretty much what we're gonna do is add Google sign in to the project that's there. So let's open it up. Okay. So if we try running our app right now, nothing really happens. So I'll show you that. Okay. Yeah, so nothing happens right now. What we're going to do is actually enable Google sign-in first. So if you guys have the project in your directory, if you could install the pods real quick. You guys want to follow along? Oh, okay. Okay, so we're good. All right, so now what we have to do is actually create our Firebase project. So we get started. I'm going to enter my password. Okay. New project. Take a little bit of time. And it's pretty fast. Once you actually set this up, you can immediately connect it to your app. All right, so now we continue. We're making an iOS app, so we'll click on iOS. And now what you want to do is find your bundle ID. It's going to be in general. So I'm just going to make a new one. Have my name. Okay. So once you register the app, Google gives you, so you might have seen info.plist in previous projects. So you get another one of those from Google, and that specifies all the information for your Firebase project. So you have to download that, and then you pretty much add this to your Xcode project. There we go. Okay, so now we have this Google service info.p list, and now we can actually connect it to Firebase. So the first step now, you notice at the top we imported Firebase. The very first step always with Firebase is to configure the app. So we just do this. And you always want to check, you just want to run your app to see if it's even connected, because sometimes it can't find that file. It needs to be able to find that exact file, Google service info.plist, otherwise it won't run. So that's very important. So we had no errors, that's good. Okay, so now we actually want to implement Google Sign-In. And the way we can do that, we imported Google Sign-In, so we actually have to make app delegate conform to GID sign-in delegate. And after doing that, we have to obtain a shared instance of GID sign-in. And we actually need to set its client ID to something in particular. And that is accessible through our Firebase app. This is just given by Google. You don't have to worry too much about this. And then we also, because app delegate conforms to GID sign-in delegate, we have to set the delegate as well. Okay. Now, if you guys uncomment this code right here, these are all the functions we have to implement for Google Sign-In. This one right here, you don't have to worry too much about it. It's just a lot of stuff. But pretty much whenever you tap that sign-in button, this is a custom URL scheme. So your app will open, go to Safari or Google Chrome, and then you can sign in. So now what we have to do, inside this file here, we have this reversed client ID. So if you want Google Sign-In to work, you have to take this, then you have to go to info, and you have to create a custom URL scheme. So you just copy and paste this in here. If you don't do that, then sign-in will just crash every time. Okay. All right. So now we're actually going to change this. So instead of just a blank view controller, we're going to use storyboard for once, but just for the launch screen. Okay. So what this is saying is we haven't signed in yet, so we're just going to show the launch screen until we sign in. And then we're going to do stuff. Okay. But we actually have to check to see if the user's already signed in. So if you noticed above, we have that shared instance of GID sign-in. So we need to check that actually. So this method actually checks to see if there's a user signed in. So we can do that. This is not optional. I don't know why it's saying that. So if we're already signed in, we just want to go to our app, right? So the way we can do that is anytime we actually make any UI changes, we want to use dispatch queue.main.async. And this is kind of weird. It's this function called sign in silently. And pretty much what that does is it calls this did sign in for method. So if you're already signed in, then you can automatically, you see here we're actually going to our app and creating a new root view controller. This will just get called once we sign in silently. That's all that means. Okay, but if we're not signed in, we want to log in. Yeah, so sign in view controller. All right, so now we can try running our app and see what happens. Okay. All right, cool. So we have this sign in view controller. Pretty simple, it's just a label and a button. And now we can actually try to sign in. So because we added that custom URL scheme, we can actually sign in. And I'll do that real quick. But what happened? Access denied. What do we do now, right? Okay. So what we have to do is actually go to our Firebase project and enable sign-in. Very easy to forget, but it's important. So we did all this stuff, initialization code. All right, so continue to console. So now what we do is go to authentication, right? Because we want to enable Google sign-in in particular. Okay. So all we have to do here is just click enabled pretty much. Let's enter a name. Okay, save. All right. So once we click save, now we can actually sign in. So if we go back here, now it should work. All right, great. So it's blank right now. There's nothing there. So if we want to actually see anything, we want to be interacting with our database. So what we can do, Firebase gives us access to this special database, this NoSQL database that I was talking about earlier. You don't have to worry about Firestore. That's sort of a new product of Google's. But we're going to focus on the real-time database today. Okay. Nope, not Firestore. Okay. So you don't have to worry about a backend, but you still have to worry about, authentication, and you want to set up security rules for your app. But for now, since we're just testing, we can just set read and write to true, which means that anyone can read from our database and write to our database, which is not good at all in production. But just for now, that's what we're going to do. Okay. All right. So you see at the top here, we have this link. And we actually also have that link in our app right here. So if we want to fetch something from the database, we want to make a request to that link, an HTTP request, and get data from it. But there's nothing here right now. So I'm actually going to do something kind of stupid and start setting it up. Okay, read. All right. Okay. I'll explain this in a second. Okay, it's not letting me add anything. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to add 2 users, right? I don't know why it's doing that. Okay. I think I know what I have to do now. Okay, yeah, here we go. Sometimes it's annoying to deal with, but it's fine. So I'm going to create 2 versions of myself, 2 different accounts. And the way it's going to work, we're going to create a messaging app, right? So each user is going to have a list of chats. And each chat is going to be a chat ID. And that ID will actually index into another path in the database, chats, which I'll create next. And then each chat is going to have a list of messages, text-based messages. Okay. So for now, we can set this to true, which pretty much means that nothing is there. We're going to do the same thing for one more user. Chats. Okay. All right, I'll delete this. I don't know why that was there. Okay. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to add a friend. So I have 2 versions of myself. So I'm going to find the other user, but nothing happens, right? So we want to actually search for users in our database. So let's implement that. So if you remember from the networking lecture, it's best to create a special class that deals with all database interactions. So what we're going to do here, up here we have this URL, and that's just getting the database URL I mentioned before from the Google Service Info plist. And then we actually have to use this special class called database reference. And that comes from Firebase. And what that does, we have to have this reference from that specific URL if we want to get any data, read data, or write data to that database. So this is just distinct to database manager. We're always going to have this in every single database transaction. So, all right. So first, I did the first two. So get chat info. This pretty much gets all of the chat IDs for a user. And then once we do that, we call get chats to get the actual, messages from each chat. So this might look kind of scary right now. I use something called a dispatch group. And what that allows you to do is make a bunch of requests simultaneously. So instead of doing one after another, because you could have hundreds of chats, you do it simultaneously. Okay, cool. So the models, we have this system. We have a list of chats. And then we have a current user, which is just going to be a username. It's going to be netID. Then we have a message class. ID, sender, recipient, body, which is just the piece of text, whether or not the recipient has read it, and then a timestamp for the message. And then we have an actual chat, which also has an ID, and then the friend, whichever friend you have, and then the array of messages that correspond to that chat. Okay. So now what we want to do is implement this. Okay, so first we want to actually search for a user, right? In an add friend view controller, we have that. It looks like it's implemented, but it's actually not. So what we can do, we want to do this, find users. So the way we can actually do that, so in Database Manager, I mentioned before this database reference. So what we can do with Firebase is we can find the specific path. So we want to look at all the chats, right? Find users. We want to look in our users path in the database. We're going to do something called query ordered by key. Okay. So input just represents whatever the user typed in to the text field. Okay. And you don't have to worry too much about this. This is like a little hack to make it so that it's all of the values in the database that are closest to this one. So this is just going to help you find all the usernames that you're looking for that are most relevant to what you typed in. Okay, so this is the actual path, and we need to call this function called observe. And this is kind of tricky. So with Firebase, anytime you call observe, if you just use observe, then anytime something changes at that path in the database, this will get called again, anytime it changes. So that might be problematic. So if you only want it to get called once, then you do observe single event. Okay. Okay, and then what we get back from the database is this data snapshot. So pretty much what we have to do is parse this, and there's probably a way to do it with Codable, but for now we're just going to parse it normally. So every snapshot has a value, and that's just going to be a dictionary because it's always JSON format. Just going to do that really quickly. Okay. Okay, so what this is doing right here, this is going to give us back all the users that are most similar to what we typed in. So we want to get all the users and the results. And then we call our completion handler, if you remember from last week. And we're actually going to filter the results because we might actually find our own username. Okay. Okay, so once we do this, we can return and we have our results. And if we don't find anyone, that's fine. We just have an empty array. Okay. So now if we rerun, this search function will actually make that request to the database and get back our users if there are any that are similar. So let's try that. So I have 2 users here. I'm the top one right now. So I'm going to try to search for the other one. But it's lowercase, so I have to specify that. And now we have a user. So that's cool. So now we actually want to add this user as a friend so we can start chatting. All right, so that's the next thing to implement. Okay. All right, so you didn't see anything happen in the database yet. So we want to actually make changes to the database to reflect the actions that we take in the app. So what we can do, pretty much the same thing. We have our database reference. And then we create the path here. It's going to be chats. So adding a friend, I'm going to make equivalent to creating a new chat with someone. So, all right, now there's this function you can do. Let's say you want something unique in the database to identify each chat. But if you can't really think of something unique, then you can use this special function called child by auto ID. And Firebase will create, a unique ID for you, which is really nice. So, all right, now we have this function called update child values. So at this reference, I'm accessing the path chats, right? And I just created a new ID. So a new, it's JSON format. So it's a new object under that path. And then now I'm actually going to put data at that location in the database. So the way we can do that, if we're creating a new chat, there are no messages yet. So what I want to do, you pass in a dictionary to this function. So earlier I said that when you set something to true, it pretty much means nothing is there. In our case, that's true. So we have this list of messages, but there's no list yet because we haven't started the chat. Okay. So what I actually want to do, there's a function that has a completion handler, and this will actually give me back the chat ID because I automatically created an ID, but I need to access that to actually create a chat. Do you guys have any questions? I know this is a lot of material all at once. All right, cool. Let's see. Okay, so if we have an error, we can just return pretty much. That's saying that there's an error. All right, so now we need to get that ID I was talking about because we use child by auto ID, but we need to actually get it. So call this reference. Okay, so now we have our chat ID, but I want to update one more thing. We have these 2 users here, but once we create a chat, we need to tie that chat back to the users. So you can actually update multiple locations in the database at once with Firebase. So what I want to do is take my friend that I just added, right? And I want to add this chat to that friend. So what I do is I use the chat ID, and then I use myself, the current username. So what that means is now we have this new chat, and we update it for my friend, so my friend has that chat in the database. So we want to do the same thing for me. Users. And I made that global so we can always access the current username. So the same thing for me. We take the chat ID and we map it to our friend. Okay, so those are our updates. And that's the really cool thing about Firebase. Now we can actually update multiple locations at once, which is really nice. So now we actually have to make another call. And this time, we don't have to worry about a completion handler. And we'll send these updates. Okay, cool. So now what we're going to do is see what happens. All right. So I'm going to find my friend. Cool. Now when I click add, you'll notice we got this here, right? So now we have this new chat automatically, and now that chat, a reference to that chat was formed in both users in the database, which is pretty nice. So, but the problem is it didn't actually show up in the simulator. So what we want to do is actually listen for new changes in the database whenever we launch our app. So we want to go to Chat's View Controller. We want to listen for them. Actually, let's see. Might be able to get it right now. Okay, yeah. So now that we have the chat, the next time we loaded the app, it shows up. All right, so this is actually an error. So if there are no messages in the chat, what we want to do is just return, because what that's trying to do is similar to the messaging app. What you could do is once you load all the chats, you just go to the very bottom of the screen of your table view. Is empty, return. Okay, let's try that one more time. Okay, so we have this screen here. It looks very familiar. We have a text field at the bottom. You can type a message. And what we want to do is send a message, right? But we actually haven't set that up with Firebase yet. So let's do that. Okay. Button pressed. All right. Yeah. So it's set up right here. So what this is saying is once we tap send, we make sure that we actually have a message in our text field. And then once we do that, we create a new instance of a message, the model that we created. And the sender is going to be the current user, which is me, the recipient, which is my friend, and then the body, which is going to be that new message. And then has read automatically should be false. And then we get the timestamp right when you send the message. And then what we want to do is actually put that message in the database. So let's implement that. Okay. So here's, it's going to look very familiar. So we take our chats, and now we actually have access to the chat ID. So we can index into that, and then we want to go into the messages path and put a new message there. But we're going to use this child by auto ID again, because we want each message to have a unique ID. Okay. Now I actually made a very handy function in message. So because the NoSQL database is JSON format, we want to have a very easy way to format it when we send it to the database. So I pretty much made this function for message to do that. It's just called forDatabase. So we can just call that and then send it to Firebase. Message.forDatabase. Okay. So now let's try it again. I'm actually going to put it next to the database so you can actually see what's going to happen. Okay. So now if I type a message and tap send, you'll notice that it actually goes into the database, but it doesn't update in the UI. It doesn't update client side. So we need to make that happen first. Okay. All right, so we have this empty function here called listen for new messages. And what we're going to do there, I told you before that if you have any database reference, or you have a question? Uh-huh. Actually, that's a great catch. That was a mistake on my part. Thank you for pointing that out. Let me see. You're right. I did not have a slash there. Let's try that one more time. Okay. So while that's loading, and he's right, that's the reason why it didn't show up under chats. So, but what we want to do, so before I said if we call .observe on any database reference, because you just use observe and not observe single event, any change will always call that function. So if I take our database reference, and now we want to listen for any changes. Let me just find it. Yeah. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to index into chats in our database using our chat ID, which is just, it's a property of our view controller. And we're going to listen for new messages, new changes in the database. So now we're going to call observe, because anytime there's a change, we want that to reflect for our user. Okay. So this dot value means that any sort of change, this will get called. Okay. Pretty much going to do the same thing. Yeah, there's a lot of documentation on what this data snapshot actually is. I'm not going to go into it right now, but it's pretty much something that you just need to parse from the database. Okay. So we're actually going to fetch the messages. And each message, like I said before, has an ID. And we actually have the message object because it's in JSON format. All right. So I did the same thing for when we're actually trying to create a message from the database. So we just pass in our message object, and then it just does it for us. We just have a new instance of a message. So that's clean. And then now we actually have to use the message ID for uniqueness. All right. Okay. So now we actually want to update our view controller to show the new messages. Ooh, what was wrong there? Value type. Oh, yeah. We know that it's going to be in JSON format, so it's always going to be in that specific format. Okay. So what we want to do now, we want to actually update the messages property of our view controller to this new array of messages. And we want to sort them, because normally you see the most recent message at the bottom, right? So we can just use this built-in sort function in Swift. And if you remember this, this refers to the first element we're looking at, and then $1 refers to the element after that. So we want to take the timestamp. We want it to be less than the second element's timestamp. And this will achieve that effect for us. So we'll see the most recent message at the bottom. And otherwise, there are no messages. So it's the empty array. Okay. So now what we want to do is actually reload our table view, right? We talked about that last time. We want to do that on the main thread. So do that. We also want to scroll to the bottom to achieve that same effect. So if we do actually have messages, then we want to scroll to the bottom. And I just added a helper function there, which has the check to see if it's empty. So I can just call it. And we don't want to animate it because we just want it to be instant. All right. So let's try this. And you'll notice we call that function every time. We call this in view did appear. So we're always listening whenever we're in this instance of a view controller. So now, because of what he said earlier, we don't actually see a message. So if I type one now we see something. And you're probably gonna wonder, okay, what happens if we have a really long message? That's taken care of right now as well. So we have two messages, we go back, it's still there, which is cool. Now let's try a second simulator. So let's get that other user, because the other user has to respond, right? Okay. 8 plus. Do you guys have any questions? Does this make sense? Or okay. All right, so while that's loading, so now we're listening for new messages, which is really cool. There are some other features we could add as well, like updating whenever a user has read a message. So right now we actually have a little blue indicator whenever there's a message that hasn't been read. So we could make that go away. We might have time for that. Let's see. All right, here's our second user, also me. And I have this new message. It's a little UI bug here, which is not good. But I have this message, and it hasn't been read. So to illustrate the effect, the reason why we're using Firebase for this specific application is because of that real-time cloud-hosted effect. So if I pull the app up on both simulators, let's look at our database. So now let's actually respond. Both users get it. So on this specific view controller, we're listening for new messages always. Both users at the same time. So anytime something changes in the database, all connected clients receive that change, which is very powerful. All right. So now what we could do, we have a couple more options. We can make it so that whenever a user views a message, that user read that message, and we can reflect that change in the database. So let's see. All right. So what we could do, update read. We have this message. All we want to do is set that Boolean property to true now. That's pretty much all we need to do. And now we take our database reference, and we want to index into chats at this particular chat ID. And now we can index into messages as well. And that's why we have an ID for a message, so we can index like this. And we update its child values. And now we use that same handy function for the database. And now let's try this again. Okay. So let's send a message from here. Ooh, this user does not get it. Oh, actually, yeah. So the other thing we have to do is set up the same listener on our main chats view controller. So that's the other problem we have to resolve. So we can listen for changes here. It's the same sort of thing, but this time we could have multiple chats. So we want to, for each chat in the system, we want to listen. All right. So find that real quick. Yeah. So it's the same thing. So we have an ID for each chat. So we want to listen to each chat for new messages as well, because we want to show that new indicator if there's a new message, whether or not it's been read. Okay. All right. Okay. I think I can use the same closure over here. Yeah. There we go. Okay. And this time it's not self.chat, it's just our chat in our loop. Okay. One more thing. All right. So now we want to actually reload our chats anytime we have a change in any of those chats. So if we do this, I'll show you the effect. Okay. So now we're always listening, which is cool. So if I send a message, we get that in the other simulator. And now that we added updating whether or not a message has been read, let's take a look at the database. So if I go into the conversation, nothing happens right now. So if we go back to our view controller, the reason why nothing happened is because you'll notice we're still observing for new messages in chat view controller. But once we get those messages, we don't do anything if it's read, if the user just read that message. So we want to actually do that. So in our chat model, I have this function called most recent message. So what we want to do is find that most recent message, if it exists, and then update it to be read. So we can unwrap it here, because there might not even be one. Okay. All right, now we have a message. I'm just going to make sure I'm doing it in the right place. Okay, so this is the scenario when this message has the current user as the recipient, right? And it hasn't been read. That's when we want to do this effect. Okay, so if we do that, then we can call now we can do this. So what this is saying is if we're the recipient and we haven't read the message, but we're inside this view controller, which means that we're pretty much seeing it. Now we want to update that message to be read. Okay, let's see what happens now. Okay, so now if we go here, yeah, so the database changed, right? So now if we go back, we don't see that blue dot anymore because it's been read. So that's another cool feature you could add to a messaging app. Yeah, so I mean, this is pretty much it as far as the demo goes. Very simple app, but it's very useful. And again, Firebase is great for this cloud-hosted database. So anytime there's a change, all connected users get it. So it's a very powerful tool, and hopefully it'll be very helpful for you guys for Hack Challenge. Do you guys have any questions? All right. Sounds great. All right, thanks, guys.